अब हम बात करेंगे मलफुजत की. इट वॉज अ कंटेम्प्रेरी रिकॉर्ड ऑफ टीचिंग्स ऑफ अ सूफी शेख as observed and compiled by a discipline. Much of what we know about pre-Mughal South Asian Sufism is derived from Malfuzat text. An Arabic word, Malfuzat literally means what has been said and refers to the text written, mostly in Persian, by the by the discipline of Sufi Sheikh, records as much as possible by the Sheikh conversation, activities and teaching. एक कंटेम्प्रेरी रिकॉर्ड ऑफ टीचिंग है सूफी शेख का, जो ऑब्जर्व करा है, कंपाइल करा है उनके डिसाइपल ने. ठीक है, अपने मलफुज़त उसका डिफ्रेंसिएशन प्रेमक हमने क्या पहले भी पढ़ लिया, तो यू कैन ऑल्सो ऐड टेक्स्ट लाइक. ठीक है, Dwight of Reynolds states that Malfuzat can be viewed as a logical development of the twin Islamic traditions of biography and collection of dicta inaugurated in the early centuries of the Islamic era to preserve the life and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad in the forms of Sirah and Hadith. Okay. These early biological dictionaries were largely based on an oral transmission of the teachings of Sufi master. ठीक है, oral transmission of the teachings of Sufi master, though written collections of the utterances of individual figures, जैसे अबू याजिद बिस्तामी हो गया, they were also undertaken. Monographs recording the oral teachings and teaching sessions of individual Sufi masters, such as Abu Sayyid ibn Abi al-Khakir and Ala al-Dawa al-Simnami, they were produced. J. Mujadani points out that within the Sufi tradition, biological notice of significant figures and compilation of their utterances were combined in work, just say Abd al-Rahman al-Sulami's Tabaqat al-Sufia and everything. Okay? So despite these antecedents from the Arab and Iranian region, Malfuzat were peculiar to South Asian Muslim culture. Okay? Carl W. Ernest points out that in India, the Malfuzat quickly became a dominant literary form from the transmission of Sufi teaching, so that later generation of Indian Sufis found it almost indispensable to commit their discourses into the textual mold. Okay? Who found it, not able to commit it, found it almost indispensable to commit their discourses into the textual mode. Indian Sufis, they are an independent genre. Each teaching हर की teaching focus कर रही है single figure whose teachings were recorded during his lifetime by a discipline in a direct contact with him. The paradigmatic example of this genre that firmly established both its form and its popularity in South Asian Sufism is Fatwa al-Fu'ad by Amir Hassan Siddiqui, which recorded the conversations of the widely revered Chishti saint Nizam al-Din Aulia. During the 13th and 14th century, when the major Sufi orders were establishing their hold in South Asian Islamic piety, few of the great Sufi Sheikh composed significant prose treatises or poetic work. Carl Ernest remarks that the oral teachings of the Chishti, as revealed in the oral discourses literature, took in canonical textual form that soon became the authoritative and normative genre both for the members of the orders and also for the lay followers. The Chishti master Nizamuddin Aliya made such a profound impact on the contemporary that a new genre of literature, the Malfuzat, emerged to embody this teaching. A new genre of literature almost came. Nizamuddin Aliya was a preeminent sheikh of Chishti order, and it was especially among the Chishtis that the genre of Malfuzat flourished. He was a preeminent sheikh of Chishti order, and it was especially among the Chishti that the genre of Malfuzat flourished. Nearly every subsequent Chishti sheikh with a claim to inherit Nizamuddin's role had his Malfuzat compiled. His successors Nasir al-Din Mahmud Chiragi Delhi and Burhan al-Din Garib both had disciples who compiled their teachings in Khair al-Majalis, Ihsan al-Aqwal, Nafaris Anfas, Geral al-Karamat, and Shamail al-Atqiya. Other orders included the Suharwadi, Firadausi, and Mahagarihi lineage followed suit. Carl W. Ernest, in his Eternal Garden propounds that the development of the Chishti Malfuzat literature may be sketched in two stages. First, it is necessary to describe the discourses of Nizam al-Din Aliya and compare them with those of the two disciples. That is Nasir al-Din Mahmud Chiragi Delhi and Burhan al-Din Garib. Now, these texts may be called for convenience the original Malfuzat. Next, these original texts, all written by literate and courtly disciples, may be juxtaposition with other series of Malfuzat purporting to be dictated by the principal Chishti Sheikh to the successors, illustrating the main line of initial authority in the order. All the Malfuzat texts made the person of the Sufi master an essential, an essential part of the teaching, and yeah, they're very, very essential. Now, for them, what is Fadl and Fal, that is morals of the heart, they're composed by as a day-to-day memoir of Nizamuddin Aldia's teaching sessions, or a daily structure that would be continued by dominant format for the text. George Magdisi has demonstrated, the keeping of personal diary by student of Hadith dates back to the 19th century and perhaps earlier. In the book Fadid al-Fawd, the recordings of the oral teaching of Nizam al-Din Aulia were evidently the spontaneous decision of his disciple, the poet Amir Hasan Sistaki Dihilawali. The success of Fawad al-Ad as an exposition of Chishti Sufism was tremendous. The court historian Barani, in an often quoted passage, has recorded the popularity of the book as an instance of great influence that Nizam al-Din exerted over the whole population of Delhi. He has a great influence. So when Nizam al-Din, successor in Delhi, Nasr al-Din Mahmud Chirag-e-Delhi, the Malfuzat, took an uneven character derived from the contrast in temperament between the serious legal and aesthetic emphasis on the sheikh and the immaturity of the compiler Hamid Kalandar. He has given an elaborate description of how the question of Khayar al-Majalis, the best of the assembly, began in 1354. The editor of Khayar al-Majalis, that is K. Nizami, remarked that Hamid Kalandar has no real and genuine aptitude of mysticism. And despite the structures of his accuracy, Hamid Kalandar compilation is nonetheless an important linking recording of Chishti teaching. More importantly, from the perspective of his study, Hamid Kalandar work reflects from the beginning of a certain tension of the Malfuzat texts of Burhan al-Din Garib as rivals of the canonical status. The flattering tone of Hamid Kalandar's first conversation with Chirag-e-Delhi suggests that one of his, motives was to establish political supremacy of Chirag-e-Delhi within Chishti succession. The most existing account of the early Malfuzat literature have neglected the early unpublished texts produced in the circle of Burhan al-Din Garib, another major disciple of Nizam al-Din, who led Sufis who participated in the earlier migration of the Muslim elite of Delhi to the Deccan capital of Daulatabad in 1329. The first and perhaps the most important of the Malfuzat texts emanating from the circle of Burhan al-Din Garib also followed the model of Fawa al-Dufad. This was Nafaizan al-Anfas, compiled by the Rukn al-Din Dadir Kashani in 48 sessions between Muharram. Later texts from the circle of Burhan al-Din Garib took an much more literary character, and while they retained oral elements, they abandoned the daily Malfuzat structures for the other genres. A more systematic approach characterizes the Malfuzat compiled by the Rukn al-Din's brother Hamad al-Din Kashani, entitled Ehsan al-Aqwal, that is the best of the saying. This book is divided up to 29 chapters, each called a Kaval or saying, covering all aspects of Sufi practice, like the practices, that is Ravish Ha, of the masters of the path, and the customs of the Lord of reality, and many more. A significant minority of Malfuzat have a variant structure in which a sheikh teachings are organized into chapters according to the topic. Such topic might include prayer, the virtues of the family of the Prophet, the manners of initiation and discipleship, and so on. Until the 19th century, Malfuzat was composed in Persian, the literary language of the South Asian Islamic society. Malfuzat has continued to be compiled to the present day, though Urdu has become the language of choice in the past 2 centuries. Okay. Now, Amina Stenfels has carried out in-depth study of 4 Malfuzat compiled by the disciples of Sayyid Jalal al-Din Hussain Bukhari of the Suharwardi Sufi order. She says that having 4 separate texts devoted to a single figure allows not only a rich description of Jalal al-Din Bukhari's life and teachings, but also a fuller understanding of the nature and Malfuzat text. At the time of this compilation, the late 14th century, Malfuzat had become an established genre beyond the confines of Chishti order. The historical importance of these texts has led to the attempt to determine the authenticity of particular Malfuzat, that is, whether it is actually by the discipline and about the sheikh that it claims to be. Malfuzat is the plural form of Malfuz, that is a passive participle noun meaning uttered or utterance. Therefore, Malfuzat are explicitly claiming to be words spoken by the sheikh, not literary texts produced by the disciples. However, it also seems obvious that the disciple is the author. He has usually included a preface with his own name, okay, stating his intention to compile his teachings of his master, explaining when and where he was in the company of his master, and frequently citing earlier Malfuzat as his models. Thus, according to Amina Sternfels, the Malfuzat is a collaborative project spoken by the master but written by the disciple with editorial input from both. Ultimately, the key to understanding the structure of the Malfuzat is the master-disciple relationship in pre-modern Sufism and the nature of spiritual authority generated by it. The mixture of material presented in the Malfuzat is related to the multiple functions. On the one hand, the Malfuzat was narrating life stories as a memoir of disciples' time with the Sheikh, as biography, hagiography of the Sheikh, and as the autobiography of the Sheikh. On the other hand, the acting is textbook and anthology summarizing Islamic doctrine, legal rules, and Sufi practices. For the reader, the blending of these two different modes make each one less effective. The biographical narratives are lost in wilderness of legal argument. The doctrinal exposition are fragmented, disorganized, interrupted, and sometimes arranged by order of explanation rather than logical development. Since they present a detailed depiction of Sufi life in the social context, Malfuzat are an invaluable source of information on social, political, and economic history, a point made repeatedly by the scholars familiar with the genre. While most medieval historical writing focused on the royal codes and military campaigns, Malfuzat illuminate whole other segments of, I'll say, Indo-Muslim society because of the author's tendencies to include almost everything that happens to or is done by the sheikhs in the presence of the disciples. These texts contain much incidental material on the various activities of the master. Thus, Malfuzat can be used to explore such disparate issues in the culinary habits, economic condition, vernacular languages, topography, and even pastimes of particular period and locality. Zade Desai, Khalik-e-Nizami, and S.A. Aksari has very productively mined various Malfuzats for this type of information, and Muhammad Aslam has summarized the historical value of 29 Malfuzat texts from the 13th to the 17th century. Now, in the preservation of a Sufi master personality and instruction long before his death, Sternfels draw a very important comparison between the Malfuzat and Tom. Rather than memorization, though that is present, the focus of the parallel between Malfuzat and Tom is in the preservation of spiritual function of the saint as guide and the teacher.